She swore she'd never fall into that trap again, that she'd never let that man get under her skin. But when Theo grabbed her arm that night, his warm fingers against her bare skin, and whispered her name in that husky voice that sent shivers down her spine, Lyra knew she was done for. The blue dress clinging to her curves, his gaze burning across every inch of her body, the electric tension between them ready to explode. Some loves don't ask permission. They invade, consume, destroy everything in their path. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and become a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, please also click the Really Worth It button. Your support makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing you stories that move you. The afternoon sun poured through the tall windows of Lancaster Manor like liquid gold, casting amber reflections across the polished mahogany floors. Lyra could smell the distinct aroma of aged oak barrels rising from the wine cellar, mingling with the delicate fragrance of jasmine climbing the stone walls outside. She stood in the east hallway, her arms full of event folders, her mind racing with the endless details of the approaching gala. The Lancaster Vineyards expansion into the international market was monumental, and she'd been put in charge of orchestrating every single detail. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "They trust you, Mija. Don't let them down." But trust was complicated when you grew up as the housekeeper's daughter in a world of inherited wealth and old surnames. Lyra had spent her childhood running barefoot through these very hallways, hiding in the library alcoves, picking grapes alongside the seasonal workers, while the Lancaster children, particularly Theo, joined her without a second thought. Back then, there were no lines between them, no invisible walls built by money or status. Theo had been her best friend, her adventure partner, the boy who taught her to climb the old oak tree by the creek and shared his sketchbooks full of architectural dreams. Then he left for Columbia University, then to New York, then to a life she could only imagine through the occasional mentions in family dinner conversations her mother reported back in the small cottage they shared at the back of the property. 8 years felt like forever. Now the mansion was a whirlwind of activity. Vendors were measuring spaces, florists were debating arrangements, and somewhere in the middle of the chaos, Lyra was supposed to keep her composure as lead event coordinator, a title she'd earned through relentless work, sleepless nights, and proving herself indispensable. She turned the corner toward the main staircase, her heels clicking against the stone, when she nearly collided with someone. Strong hands caught her shoulders. "Careful." The voice stopped her heart. Lyra looked up, and the folders slipped from her grip, scattering across the floor in a cascade of paper and fabric samples. But she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Theo. He looked different, older, his shoulders broader under a charcoal wool sweater that hugged his body in ways that made her mouth go dry. His dark hair was slightly longer, messy like he'd been running his hands through it. But his eyes, those storm-grey eyes that once looked at her with boyish mischief, now held something deeper, something that made her skin heat up. Lyra. Her name on his lips sounded like both a prayer and a curse. She tried to speak, but her throat had forgotten how to form words. His scent hit her then, cedar and citrus with an undertone of something distinctly masculine that hadn't been there when they were young. It wrapped around her senses like smoke. I didn't know you were coming back," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to surprise everyone." His hands were still on her shoulders, warm and solid, and he seemed to realize it at the same moment she did. He released her slowly, but his gaze never left her face. God, Lyra. You look beautiful." The word landed between them like a stone thrown into still water, sending ripples in every direction. She was wearing a simple blue dress. Nothing fancy, just a fitted midi she'd chosen that morning for its practicality. But the way he looked at her made her feel like she was wrapped in silk and diamonds. His eyes traced the curve of her neck, the exposed line of her collarbone, the way the fabric hugged her waist before flowing over her hips. "Thank you," she whispered, hating how breathless her voice sounded. "You look different." 8 years does that. A small smile tugged at his lips, but there was something guarded in his expression, something that said he'd changed in ways that had nothing to do with physical appearance. They stood there, frozen in the hallway, while the sounds of the mansion buzzed distantly around them. Voices calling from the kitchen, the faint hum of a vacuum from the upper floors, the rustle of wind against the windows. But in this pocket of space, time seemed suspended. "I should help you with this." Theo knelt down, gathering the scattered folders with careful hands. Lyra joined him, their fingers brushing when they both reached for the same paper. The contact was electric. She pulled back slightly, but not before seeing the way his jaw tightened, the way his breath caught. When he handed her the stack of folders, his fingers lingered against hers for one heartbeat longer than they should have. "You're organizing the gala," he said, standing up. It wasn't a question. "Yes, your father gave me the opportunity." She straightened, clutching the folders against her chest like a shield. "It's the biggest event the Vineyard has ever held. He talks about you constantly. Says you're the reason this place runs so smoothly now." There was pride in his voice, but also something else, something that sounded like regret. "I worked hard to earn that trust." "I know you did." He took a step forward, and she felt the air shift between them, charged, dangerous, alive with possibility. "Lyra, Theo, there you are," a voice called from the end of the hallway. Eleanor Lancaster, Theo's mother, appeared with a radiant smile, her arms outstretched. "Darling, we've been looking everywhere for you." The moment shattered. Theo turned toward his mother, but not before Lyra saw the flash of frustration in his eyes. She used the interruption to step back, to rebuild the walls that had momentarily crumbled. "I should get back to work," Lyra said quickly, her voice steadier now. "Welcome back, Theo." She walked away before he could respond, her heart hammering against her ribs, her skin still burning where his hands had touched her shoulders. Behind her, she could feel his gaze following her down the hallway like a brand. In the safety of the empty ballroom, Lyra pressed her back against the closed door and let out a shaky breath. Her hands trembled as she set the folders aside. "This doesn't change anything," she told herself firmly. "He's still a Lancaster. You're still the housekeeper's daughter." Some lines aren't meant to be crossed, but even as she thought it, her fingertips traced the spot on her shoulder where his touch still lingered, warm and undeniable. Outside the window, the sun dipped lower over the vineyard rows, painting the sky in shades of fire and longing. And somewhere in the mansion, Theo stood in that same hallway, fist clenched at his side, wondering how he was supposed to pretend that seeing her again hadn't just turned his entire world upside down. The following days unfolded like a dangerous dance, where every step had to be measured, every glance controlled. Lyra threw herself into work with an almost obsessive intensity, as if budget spreadsheets and guest lists could build a solid barrier between her and Theo's magnetic presence that seemed to fill every corner of the mansion. But the universe, apparently, had other plans. It was mid-morning when Lyra entered the library to review contracts with the wine suppliers. The room smelled of aged leather and old paper, a fragrance that always calmed her. Light filtered through the emerald green velvet curtains, creating golden patterns across the oak bookshelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. She loved this space, always had. It was where she and Theo used to hide as children, building forts with cushions and reading adventure stories until the sun set. She didn't expect to find him there. Theo was sitting in one of the leather armchairs by the window, a laptop open on his lap, his forehead creased in concentration. He wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing muscular forearms she definitely shouldn't be noticing. His reading glasses, something new, rested on the tip of his nose, giving him an intellectual air that contrasted with the raw masculinity of his physique. Lyra froze in the doorway, torn between retreating silently and announcing her presence. The decision was taken from her hands when a floorboard creaked under her foot. Theo looked up immediately, and that damned slow smile spread across his face, the kind of smile that made butterflies explode in her stomach. "Lyra." He closed the laptop and removed his glasses, setting them on the side table. "I was wondering when you'd show up." "I didn't know you'd be here," she replied, her voice coming out more defensive than intended. "I need to review some contracts. Don't let me get in your way." He gestured toward the large mahogany table in the center of the room. "There's plenty of room for two." There was something about the way he said "for two" that made heat rise up her neck. She nodded briefly and headed to the table, acutely aware of every movement, of how the fabric of her pencil skirt brushed against her thighs as she walked, of how her heels made her legs look longer. "Stop it," she scolded herself. "He's not looking at you like that." Except he was. She could feel the weight of his gaze as she organized the documents, as she opened the brown leather folder, as she picked up her pen and began making notes. It was as if her skin had developed sensors specially attuned to Theo Lancaster's attention. The silence in the library was broken only by the scratch of her pen on paper and the occasional distant clinking of dishes from the kitchen. Outside, she could hear birds chirping and the whisper of wind through the vines. "You changed your hair," Theo said suddenly, his voice breaking the quiet like a stone thrown at glass. Lyra looked up, finding him watching her with an intensity that made her heart stumble. "It's longer," he continued, his voice lower now, almost intimate. "It suits you, makes your eyes look darker." She blinked, momentarily speechless. How could he talk about her hair and make it sound like he was saying something completely different? Something much more dangerous? "Thank you," she murmured, lowering her eyes back to the papers, even though the words now seemed blurred and meaningless. She heard the rustle of fabric, the sound of footsteps against the Persian rug, and then he was there, standing on the other side of the table, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You need help with this?" He leaned forward, bracing his hands on the table, his fingers just inches from hers. "I did some market analysis for the expansion. I might have insights that could help." Lyra should have said no, should have maintained the professional distance she'd worked so hard to establish. But when she looked up and found those gray eyes studying her with something that looked like vulnerability mixed with desire, the words died in her throat. "Sure," she heard herself say. "Any help would be useful." He pulled up a chair, not from the other side of the table, but right beside her, so close their shoulders almost touched when he sat down. His scent wrapped around her again, that combination of cedar and something uniquely Theo that made her senses spin. They worked in silence for a few minutes, their heads bent over the documents, their fingers occasionally brushing when they pointed to the same line of text. Each accidental touch was like an electric spark, brief but impossible to ignore. "Do you remember," Theo said softly, his eyes still on the papers, "when we used to come here and pretend we were explorers planning expeditions?" Lyra smiled despite herself. "You always insisted on being the captain, and you always let me think I was in charge, while you actually made all the important decisions." He turned his head to look at her, and suddenly their faces were dangerously close. "Some things never change." Her breath caught. She could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, could count the faint freckles across the bridge of his nose, could see the way his lips curved slightly at the corners. "Theo." She didn't know if it was a warning or a plea. "I missed you, Lyra." The words came out raw, honest, and she saw the truth of them written across every line of his face. "Every day, every damn day in New York I thought about you, wondered what you were doing, if you were happy, if you thought about me too." Her heart was pounding so loud she was sure he could hear it. "You never called, never wrote. Because I knew if I heard your voice, I wouldn't be able to stay away." He raised his hand slowly, as if giving her time to pull back, and when she didn't, he gently brushed a strand of hair that had fallen across her face, tucking it behind her ear. The touch was so gentle, so tender, that she felt tears prick her eyes. "We can't," she whispered, but she didn't move away. "You know we can't." "Why not?" His hand was still near her face, his fingers now tracing the line of her jaw with a reverence that made her entire body tremble. "Give me one good reason, Lyra, one reason that isn't about what other people will think." She closed her eyes, trying to gather strength that seemed to have abandoned her. "Because when you leave again, and you will, I'll be the one left here. And I can't let myself want something I can never have." When she opened her eyes, she found him looking at her with an intensity that left her breathless. "What if I told you I'm not planning on going anywhere?" His voice was hoarse, loaded with emotion. "What if I told you I came home because I finally understood that home was never about this place? It was always about you." The words hung between them, heavy and dangerous and full of promises she didn't dare believe. Before she could respond, the library door burst open. "Oh, there you two are!" Margaret's cheerful voice, Eleanor's assistant, cut through the moment like a blade. "Lyra, dear," The florists just arrived, and they're insisting on speaking with you about the orchids. Something about the color being wrong? Lyra stood up so quickly the chair nearly toppled. Of course I'm coming. She gathered her papers with trembling hands, carefully avoiding Theo's gaze. Thanks for the help. She practically fled the library, her heart still racing wildly, her skin still tingling where he'd touched her. Behind her, Theo remained sitting in the empty chair, his head in his hands, wondering how the hell he was going to survive being this close to her without being able to have her completely. Outside the window, storm clouds were beginning to gather on the horizon, an omen of the emotional turmoil that was only just beginning. The night of the gala arrived wrapped in an atmosphere of electric anticipation. Lancaster Manor had been transformed into a fairy tale setting. Crystal chandeliers cast prisms of golden light across the marble walls. Arrangements of white roses and purple orchids perfumed the air with an intoxicating fragrance, and the soft sound of a string quartet floated through the halls like a dream melody. Lyra had spent the last 3 days immersed in frantic preparations, ensuring every detail was perfect. She'd avoided Theo as much as humanly possible, building walls of professionalism and distance every time their orbits threatened to cross. But tonight, hidden in her temporary room in the staff quarters, as she adjusted the wine-colored dress she'd chosen weeks ago, she knew there would be no escape. The dress was a statement, strapless with a sweetheart neckline that hugged her breasts in a respectful but undeniably sensual way, a defined waist that accentuated her curves, and a skirt that fell in layers of satin to her ankles. The deep wine color contrasted beautifully with her golden skin tone, making her brown eyes seem even more intense. She'd pulled her hair into a low, elegant bun, leaving a few loose strands to frame her face. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman reflected there. She was no longer the girl who ran barefoot through the vineyards. She was someone who belonged at this party, in this world of champagne and sophisticated conversations. But as she descended the service stairs, her heart hammered with a mixture of anxiety and something deeper, the acute awareness that Theo would be there, and that seeing her like this would change something irrevocable between them. The ballroom was packed when she slipped in discreetly through one of the side doors. Over 200 guests circulated through the room, international investors, wine distributors, local celebrities, all dressed in their finest. Conversations blended into a constant hum, punctuated by the clinking of crystal glasses and polite laughter. Lyra took her position near the catering staff, mentally checking off each element of the evening. Everything was running perfectly. Waiters circulated with trays of canapes, wine flowed generously, and Theo's father, William Lancaster, was already at the center of a group of investors, his confident voice filling the space as he spoke about expansion into Asian markets. That's when she saw him. Theo stood on the other side of the ballroom, devastatingly handsome in a black tuxedo that molded to his body with perfect tailoring. His hair was combed back, revealing the strong line of his jaw, and he held a glass of whiskey with that casual ease that came from a lifetime of privilege. He was talking with a group of older men, his posture relaxed but attentive. And then, as if sensing the weight of her gaze, he turned his head. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Lyra saw the exact moment he truly saw her. Saw the way his entire body froze, how the glass stopped halfway to his lips, how his eyes widened slightly before darkening with something that made heat spread through her entire body. He murmured an excuse to the group and began crossing the ballroom toward her, his walk determined and predatory, like a man on a mission. But before he could reach her, a smooth voice interrupted. "You must be Lyra." She turned to find a tall man with blonde hair and a confident smile, extending his hand. He wore an impeccable tuxedo and had that gleam in his eyes that came from old money and expensive education. "Graham Mitchell," he introduced himself, his hand gripping hers firmly, "investor with the Rothschild Group. I've been hearing wonderful things about the woman behind this spectacular evening." "That's very kind of you," Lyra responded professionally, acutely aware that Theo had stopped a few yards away, watching the interaction with an unreadable expression. "Kindness has nothing to do with it. It's simply recognizing talent." Graham leaned slightly closer, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone. "Tell me, would a woman as talented as you grant me the honor of a dance?" Lyra hesitated. She could feel Theo's gaze burning her skin, could see from her peripheral vision the way his fingers tightened around the whiskey glass until his knuckles turned white. "I really should," she began. "Please," Graham interrupted with a charming smile. "Just one dance. You've worked tirelessly tonight. You deserve to enjoy some of the party you created." Before she could refuse again, he was already gently guiding her toward the dance floor, his hand resting respectfully on her back. The orchestra began a slow waltz, and Lyra had no choice but to accept. Graham was an excellent dancer. His movements were fluid and confident, guiding her across the floor with practiced skill. He chatted politely, asking questions about her background, complimenting her work. But Lyra barely heard a word, because her eyes had found Theo. He stood at the edge of the dance floor, completely still, his jaw so tight she could see the muscle pulsing there. His eyes never left hers, dark, intense, possessive in a way that made her stomach tighten with desire and fear in equal measures. When Graham spun her, her dress flowed around her legs like liquid wine, the layers of satin catching the light from the chandeliers and creating a hypnotic effect. She felt every gaze in the room converging on her, felt the weight of attention, but only one pair of eyes mattered. "You're extraordinary," Graham murmured near her ear, and she felt more than saw Theo take a step forward, his entire body rigid with barely contained tension. The music came to an end, and Graham led her back off the floor with a satisfied smile. "Thank you for the dance. I hope we can—" "Graham." Theo's voice cut through the air like a blade, cold and too controlled. "I need to speak with Lyra, now." It wasn't a request. Graham raised his eyebrows, clearly surprised by the tone, but quickly recovered with the grace of someone accustomed to navigating complicated social dynamics. "Of course." "It was a pleasure, Lyra." Theo didn't wait for formalities. His hand closed around her arm, not forcefully, but with an unmistakable firmness that sent waves of heat through her skin. "Come with me." "Theo, I can't just leave the—" "Now, Lyra." His eyes met hers, and what she saw there made her objections die in her throat. It wasn't anger. It was something much more dangerous. It was raw need, uncontrolled desire, a hunger he was no longer trying to hide. She let him guide her through the crowd, aware of the curious looks following them, the raised eyebrows, the whispers that would start before they even left the room. But in that moment, with his hand burning through the thin fabric of her dress, with her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears, she didn't care. They crossed the hallway, past the portrait gallery, climbed a flight of stairs, until Theo pushed open the library door, that same library where days ago he'd confessed to missing her. The door closed behind them with a final click, and suddenly the silence was deafening. The music from the party was just a distant whisper, and all Lyra could hear was their own accelerated breathing and the sound of Theo's heart beating. Or was it hers? He released her and took a few steps away, running his hands through his hair in frustration, messing up the careful styling. When he turned to face her, his eyes were wild. "Why were you dancing with him?" The words came out rough, loaded with emotion. "Because he invited me." Lyra crossed her arms over her chest, as much to protect herself as to hide the trembling in her hands. "And because you never invited me." "Never invited you?" He gave a humorless laugh. "Lyra, I could barely keep myself away from you tonight. The moment I saw you in that dress, all I wanted to do was take you out of that room, keep you just for myself, make everyone know that you—" He stopped abruptly, his jaw tightening again. "That I what?" She took a step forward, her heart in her throat. "Finish the sentence, Theo." He closed his eyes, breathing deeply as if trying to control himself, but when he opened them again, all control had vanished. "That you're mine, that you always have been." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and inevitable. And then he was moving, crossing the space between them in 3 long strides, and suddenly she was trapped between his body and the bookshelf behind her. And God, he was so close she could feel the heat radiating from him like a furnace. "You think I don't see you?" His voice was hoarse, broken. "You think I haven't wanted you since the moment I came back and saw you there, all grown up, all woman, all beautiful and perfect, and so completely out of my reach that it hurts to breathe? Theo?" His name came out like a sigh, like a prayer. He raised his hands, framing her face with a tenderness that contrasted with the intensity in his eyes. His thumbs traced her cheekbones, and she leaned into the touch without even realizing it. "Tell me it's not just friendship," she whispered, echoing the words he'd said days ago. "Tell me you feel what I feel." He pressed his forehead to hers, their breaths mingling, their lips just a breath apart. "I feel everything, Lyra. Every damn thing." And then there were no more words, because he was kissing her. The kiss was devastating. It wasn't gentle or hesitant. It was years of repressed desire exploding in a single moment of total surrender. Theo's lips captured hers with a hunger that made her knees weaken, and if it weren't for the way he pressed her against the bookshelf, she would have collapsed right there. Lyra felt her hands rise instinctively, burying themselves in his hair, pulling him closer even though there was no more space between their bodies. He tasted of whiskey and something darker, more addictive. He tasted of dangerous promises and impossible futures. Theo groaned against her mouth, a low guttural sound that reverberated through her body like thunder. His hands slid from her face to her waist, pulling her even closer, and she could feel every hard line of his body pressed against her soft curves. The contrast was intoxicating. When they finally broke apart to breathe, both were gasping, their chests rising and falling in desperate synchrony. Theo rested his forehead against hers again, his eyes closed as if trying to memorize that moment. "God, Lyra," he whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. "I dreamed about this. For years. Every damn night in New York I dreamed of kissing you like this." She trembled in his arms, her hands still tangled in his hair. "Why didn't you ever come back? Why did you leave me here thinking I was just the housekeeper's daughter to you?" He opened his eyes then, and what she saw there made her stop breathing. Pain, regret, and something so intense it made her heart ache. "Because I was a coward." His hands rose to frame her face again, his thumbs wiping away tears she hadn't even realized were falling. "Because I was 18 and terrified of what I felt for you. Because my father made it very clear I had a path to follow, college, career, the right kind of connections, and you didn't fit into that perfectly planned equation." The words were like knives, but at the same time there was a brutal honesty in them that she respected more than kind lies. "And now?" she forced herself to ask, even though part of her feared the answer. "What's changed?" "I've changed." He slid his hands down the length of her arms, intertwining his fingers with hers. "I spent 8 years building exactly the kind of life my father wanted for me. Made the right contacts, got the right promotions, dated the right women. And you know what I discovered?" She shook her head, unable to form words. "That none of it meant a damn thing when I came home every night, and the only person I wanted to see, the only voice I wanted to hear, was 3,000 miles away." He pulled one of her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a reverence that made new tears burn her eyes. "You've always been my home, Lyra. I was just too much of an idiot to realize it until now. This scares me," she admitted quietly, her vulnerability exposed and raw. "Because I spent years trying not to love you, trying to convince myself we were just childhood friends, that you'd moved on, that I should do the same. And now you're here, saying all the right things, and I want so badly to believe." "Then believe." He released her hand to slide his fingers along her jaw, tilting her face up until she had no choice but to look into his eyes. "I'm not asking you to trust blindly. I know I have to prove this. But give me a chance, Lyra. Let me show you that this time is different. That this time I'm staying." She wanted to believe. God, how she wanted to. But years of self-protection, of building walls around her heart, couldn't be torn down with a kiss and pretty words, no matter how sincere they seemed. "People will talk," she said, reaching for practical reasoning when the emotional was too frightening to face. "Your family, the staff, everyone at this party. They already saw you drag me out like a man who can't stay away from the woman he loves." He finished, and the words hit her with the force of a freight train. "Let them talk, Lyra. I don't care." "But I care." The words exploded from her with more force than she intended. She pulled away from his touch, creating physical distance because the emotional was becoming impossible to maintain. "You can afford not to care because you're a Lancaster. You can do whatever you want and people will call it eccentric or passionate. But me? I'm the housekeeper's daughter sleeping with the boss's son, I become the cliché, the opportunist, the... Stop. The word came out as a command, hard and final. Theo closed the distance she'd created in 2 long strides. Don't do this. Don't reduce what we have to something sordid just because you're scared. I am scared, she admitted, her voice breaking. I'm terrified, Theo, because if I give myself to this, if I let you all the way in and then you change your mind or realize your family will never accept it or decide New York is where you really belong, I won't survive it. Not again. He stood still, just watching her for a long moment, and she saw when something solidified in his expression, an iron determination she recognized from when they were children, and he decided to climb the tallest tree or explore the deepest part of the creek. Again? He asked softly. What do you mean, again? Lyra closed her eyes, part of her wishing she could swallow those words back. But it was too late now. I already went through this once, Theo. When you left the first time, when you stopped calling, stopped writing, and I realized that for you it had just been childhood friendship you outgrew. But for me, she opened her eyes, letting him see all the pain she'd carried. For me, it was the day my heart broke, and I spent the next 8 years trying to piece it back together. Theo's expression completely crumbled. He looked physically impacted by her words, as if she'd struck him. Lyra, I didn't know. I never... God, I was so selfish, so completely blind. I'm not saying this to make you feel bad, she said quickly, wiping the tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand. I'm saying it because you need to understand why I can't just jump headfirst into this, why I need more than pretty words and kisses that make me forget my own name. He nodded slowly, and she saw the moment he made a decision. He took a step back, creating respectful space between them, even though it clearly cost him to do so. You're right, he said, his voice calmer now, more controlled. I can't just expect you to trust me based on feelings. I need to show you, through actions, not words. Lyra blinked, surprised by the turn. What do you mean? I mean I won't pressure you. I won't kiss you again until you ask me to. A small, sad smile curved his lips. Even if it kills me to do it, I'm going to court you properly, Lyra Torres. I'm going to show you every day that I'm not going anywhere, that you're not a phase or a fantasy. You're everything. Her heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. Theo, and about people talking. He continued, his voice gaining strength. Tomorrow morning I'm going to talk to my father. I'm going to make it clear that I want you by my side, not as an employee, but as a partner. I'm going to offer you a real stake in the winery's expansion, not as a favor, but because you've earned it. Because nobody knows this place, this business, better than you. Lyra stared at him, speechless. This was more than she'd ever dared imagine. I won't let anyone diminish you or what we have, he said with fierce intensity. I'm going to make everyone see what I see. A brilliant, talented, strong woman who transformed this place into something bigger than it was. And if they can't see that, then they can go to hell. A wet laugh escaped her, part sob, part relief. You really think it's that simple? No. He was honest. I think it's going to be complicated and hard, and we're going to have to fight for it. But, Lyra, he took a step forward again, but this time kept his hands to himself, respecting the space she needed. I learned one thing in 8 years away from here. Nothing worth having comes easy. And you're worth every damn battle. The silence stretched between them, loaded with everything that was said and everything that still hung in the air, unsaid. Outside the library, the party continued, music playing, voices laughing, the clinking of glasses. But in that sacred space, only the two of them existed, balanced on the edge of something terrifying and beautiful. I need to think, Lyra finally said, her voice weak but firm. I need to process all of this. How much time do you need? He asked, and there was vulnerability in the question that touched her deeply. I don't know. Days, maybe weeks. She met his eyes. But Theo, I want to believe you. I want so badly for this to be real. The smile that lit up his face was like the sun rising. Then I'll wait, however long it takes. He turned to leave but stopped at the door, looking back over his shoulder. But just for the record, that dress, It's going to kill me in dreams for the next 100 years. And with that he left, leaving her alone in the library with her heart racing, her lips swollen, and for the first time in years, a spark of hope burning in her chest. The next 3 days were sweet and exquisite torture. Theo kept his word in a way that left Lyra simultaneously frustrated and deeply moved. He didn't kiss her, didn't touch her inappropriately, but his presence was constant, a gravitational force she couldn't ignore even when she tried. He showed up in the kitchen during breakfast, bringing fresh croissants from the French bakery she'd mentioned loving years ago. He left small notes on her work desk. Nothing extravagant, just simple observations. "You forgot to eat lunch again. There's a plate waiting for you in the warmer." Or, "The roses in the East Garden finally bloomed. Remembered you always said they were your favorite." And he watched. God, how he watched. Lyra could feel his eyes on her when she crossed a room, when she laughed at something one of the staff members said, when she stretched to reach a file on a high shelf. It was like being tracked by a predator, except there was nothing threatening in that gaze, just pure hunger and barely contained desire. It was on the morning of the 4th day that everything changed. Lyra was in the greenhouse, checking on the progress of the flower arrangements for a smaller event happening that weekend. The air was humid and heavy, with the scent of wet earth and blooming flowers. Sunlight filtered through the glass created a bathhouse effect, and she'd tied her hair in a high ponytail, wearing just a light cotton blouse and linen pants that stuck slightly to her skin because of the humidity. She was so absorbed in examining a particularly stubborn orchid that she didn't hear the greenhouse door open. "Running from me?" Lyra jumped, spinning around abruptly to find Theo standing in the entrance. But this wasn't the polished and controlled Theo she'd seen the last few days. This Theo was wet from the rain that had started falling outside. His hair dripped water. His white shirt was completely soaked and stuck to his body like a second skin, revealing every muscle contour, every line of definition. He looked wild, dangerous, completely stunning. "I wasn't," she started, but the words died when he began walking toward her with that predatory stride that made her stomach tighten. "You were." He didn't stop until he was inches from her, so close she could see the raindrops caught in his eyelashes, could feel the heat radiating from his body despite the wet clothes. "And I'm trying, Lyra. I'm trying to give you space, give you time. But seeing you every day and not being able to touch you is killing me." Her heart was pounding so loud she was sure he could hear it. "Theo, we agreed. I know what we agreed." He raised his hand slowly, telegraphing his movements, giving her time to pull back if she wanted. When she didn't move, he gently brushed a strand of hair that had escaped from her ponytail, tucking it behind her ear with a tenderness that made her legs tremble. "But I need to know, Lyra, it's been 4 days. Have you made a decision?" She had. God, she'd made a decision on the second night, when she woke up in the middle of the night with the taste of him still on her lips and the memory of his hands on her skin. But admitting it out loud made everything real, irrevocable, terrifying. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I'm scared. I know." His fingers traced the line of her jaw, and she leaned into the touch without thinking. "But scared of what, specifically? Tell me so I can make it go away." "That this is too good to be true." The words came out in a rush. "That you'll wake up one day and realize you made a mistake. That your family will never really accept me. That I'll lose not just you, but this place, this job, everything I've built." "Then let me catch you," he interrupted softly, echoing the words he'd said days ago. "Let me show you that none of that will happen. That I won't wake up and realize I made a mistake. Because loving you isn't a mistake. It's the only right thing I've ever done." Tears burned her eyes. "You said loving, yes?" There was no hesitation in his voice, no doubt in his eyes. "I love you, Lyra Torres. I've loved you since we were 16, and you taught me to identify different grape varieties by smell. I've loved you since the first time you laughed, that uninhibited laugh that makes your nose wrinkle. I loved you in New York when I looked at the skyline and wished you were by my side. And I love you now more than words can express." The world stopped. All she could hear was the rain drumming on the glass roof. All she could feel was the heat of his body radiating to her. All she could see were those grey eyes full of raw truth and absolute vulnerability. "Say something," he whispered, and for the first time she saw real fear in his face. "Please, Lyra, say anything." "You're an idiot," she said, and then, before he could process the words, she was pulling him down and crushing her lips against his. This kiss was different from the first. It wasn't desperate or urgent. It was inevitable. It was the tide finally reaching the shore. It was the sun rising after a long night. It was everything clicking into place after years of being misaligned. Theo groaned against her mouth, his hands finally sliding around her waist and pulling her completely against him. She didn't care that he was wet, didn't care that her clothes were now soaked too. All that mattered was the feeling of his lips on hers, the taste of him on her tongue, the way their bodies molded to each other like puzzle pieces. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily, their foreheads pressed together, their hands intertwined between their bodies. "Idiot!" he managed to say, a laugh vibrating through his chest, "for taking 8 years to come back and tell me this." She opened her eyes, letting him see everything. The love, the fear, the hope, the need. "Because I love you too, you idiot. Always have. Since that summer when you taught me to swim in the creek and promised you'd never let me drown." Something broke in his expression. All the defenses, all the walls, everything crumbling until there was only raw truth. "Lyra, and yes," she continued, her voice stronger now, "yes to everything, yes to giving you a chance, yes to building something together, yes to being your partner, yes to—" He kissed her again, this time with a reverence that made tears finally fall from her eyes. It was adoration and gratitude and promise all in one devastating kiss. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips. "Thank you for trusting me. I swear I won't waste this." "You better not waste it," she said, managing a smile through the tears. "Because if you hurt me, my mother has access to all the kitchen knives." He laughed, a real, deep, genuine laugh that she felt reverberate through her own bones. "Duly noted." They stayed like that for long moments, just holding each other while the rain continued to fall outside, creating a private world just for them. His hands traced lazy patterns on her back, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "So, what happens now?" she finally asked. "Now," he said, his voice hoarse but determined, "I talk to my father. Today, make it clear that I want you as my partner, that I see a future for us building this place together. And then—" he pulled back enough to look into her eyes. "Then I take you to dinner, a proper dinner. Candles, wine, the whole thing. Court you the way I should have done years ago." "That sounds frighteningly normal," she admitted. "Good." He smiled, that slow, devastating smile that did dangerous things to her self-control. "Because I want to give you normal. I want to give you dates and flowers and all the cliché romance you deserve, but also—" His eyes darkened, his voice dropping to a tone that made heat spread through her body. "I also want to give you this." He kissed her again, deeper this time, his hands sliding from her waist to her hip, pulling her so close there was no space between their bodies. She could feel every hard line of him pressed against her, could feel the physical evidence of how much he wanted her, and her own body responded with a liquid heat that spread from her core to her fingertips. "Theo," she moaned when his lips left hers to trace a line of fire down her neck. "We can't. Not here." "I know." He gently bit the spot where her neck met her shoulder, and she had to hold onto his shoulders to stay standing. "But you asked me to kiss you again, so technically I'm just following orders." She laughed, the sound coming out breathless and a little desperate. "That's not exactly what I meant." "No." He pulled back, his eyes dancing with mischief and something much darker. "Then be more specific next time." "Next time," she promised, managing to find some remnant of control, "I'll be very, very specific about exactly what I want you to do to me." The effect of her words was immediate. His eyes darkened until they were almost black. His jaw tightened, and she felt the tremor that ran through his body. "You're trying to kill me," he accused, but there was admiration in his voice. "I'm just giving you a reason to hurry up with that conversation with your father." She rose on her tiptoes and pressed a chaste kiss, well, relatively chaste, to his lips. "Now go, before I change my mind about doing this the right way." He groaned, but obediently took a step back, creating distance that clearly hurt them both. "You're cruel. You love me, she shot back. God help me, I do. And the way he said it, with reverence and exasperation and something close to wonder, made her heart swell until she thought it might burst. He left the greenhouse, walking back out into the rain, and she watched through the fogged glass as he ran back to the mansion, his figure gradually becoming just a blurred silhouette. When he disappeared from sight, Lyra pressed her fingers to her swollen lips, feeling the smile she couldn't suppress spreading across her face. For the first time in 8 years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, fairy tales could be real. Theo's conversation with William Lancaster happened that same afternoon, behind the closed doors of the mahogany-lined office that smelled of Cuban cigars and generational ambition. Lyra wasn't present, but she heard the rumors. It started with Margaret, Eleanor's assistant, who casually mentioned during lunch that there were raised voices coming from the office. Then it was Maria, one of the cooks, who whispered that Mr. Lancaster had called his wife to join the conversation. And finally, around 3 in the afternoon, Lyra's own mother appeared in her temporary office with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Mija," Rosa Torres said softly, closing the door behind her. She was a small woman, but there was a strength in her forged by years of hard work and raising a daughter alone. "We need to talk." Lyra's stomach tightened. "Mum?" "I know." Rosa raised her hand, stopping the words before they could form. She pulled up a chair and sat down, her eyes so similar to Lyra's, studying her face with the intensity of someone who knew every secret. "Theo talked to William about you. About you two." Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. "How do you know?" "Because Eleanor came to me 20 minutes ago." Rosa sighed, and for the first time Lyra noticed the lines of worry around her mother's eyes. "She wanted to know if I was aware of the developing relationship between you and her son." "And what did you say?" Lyra's voice came out smaller than she intended. "I told the truth, that I saw the way you two look at each other and that I'm not blind." Rosa leaned forward, taking her daughter's hands. "Lyra, mi amor, I need to know. Is this real, or are you know people are going to think that I'm using him," Lyra finished bitterly, "that I'm trying to climb the social ladder by sleeping with the boss? I know, Mum. Believe me, I know exactly what people are going to think." "I don't care what people think," Rosa said fiercely, squeezing Lyra's hands. "I care about you. I care if your heart's going to be broken when he realizes that their world and ours don't mix as easily as he thinks." The words were like arrows, each one hitting the mark because they were the same fears Lyra had harbored in her own heart. "He said he loves me," Lyra whispered, tears burning her eyes. "He said he wants to build a future with me, that he wants to make me a partner in the expansion." Rosa was quiet for a long moment, her thumbs tracing circles on Lyra's hands, a comforting gesture she'd done since Lyra was a child. "And do you believe him?" "I want to believe him." The admission came out broken. "But I'm terrified, Mum, because if I give myself completely and this ends, then you'll survive," Rosa interrupted with surprising firmness. "Just like I survived when your father left us. Just like we've survived every hard thing life has thrown our way. You're a Torres, Mija. We don't break easily." Lyra let out a wet laugh, wiping away the tears that had started to fall. "I inherited your stubbornness, among other things." Rosa smiled, but then her expression grew serious again. "But Lyra, you need to understand something. If you do this, if you really build a life with Theo, there will be battles. His family may eventually accept it, but society, the other vineyard families, their old friends, they're going to look at you and see the housekeeper's daughter who landed the Lancaster son." "I know. Let me finish." Rosa squeezed her hands tighter. "What I'm saying is you need to be prepared to fight. Not just for him, but for yourself, for your place at the table, for respect that you'll have to wrench from the hands of people who think you don't deserve it. And you can't let love, no matter how real it is, make you forget your own worth." The words sank deep, settling somewhere near her core. "How did you get so wise?" "Years of watching rich people make stupid choices," Rosa replied dryly, pulling a genuine laugh from Lyra. "Now tell me, what exactly did Theo propose to William?" Before Lyra could answer, a knock on the door interrupted them. They both turned to see Theo standing in the doorway, his tie undone. his hair messy as if he'd run his fingers through it repeatedly. He looked exhausted, but determined. "Mrs. Torres," he said respectfully, entering the room, "may I steal your daughter for a moment?" Rosa studied him with the kind of look only mothers can give, evaluating, judging, weighing the worth of his soul in a single glance. Whatever she saw must have passed some test, because she nodded and stood up. "You hurt her, Theodore Lancaster," she said softly, but there was steel in her voice. "And there won't be a place on earth where you can hide from me." Theo didn't flinch. "If I hurt her, ma'am, I'll turn myself in voluntarily for whatever you deem appropriate punishment." Rosa nodded, then walked past him toward the door. She stopped beside Lyra, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Be brave, Misha, but also be smart." And then they were alone. Lyra stood up, her heart pounding so loud she could hear it in her ears. "How did it go?" Theo exhaled a long breath, running his hand through his hair. "It was intense. My father wasn't exactly jumping for joy at first." Her heart sank. "Theo." "But," he interrupted, taking 2 long steps toward her and taking her hands. He listened. "And when I presented the numbers, when I showed him exactly how much of this expansion was the direct result of your work, your networking, your vision, he couldn't argue." "And your mother?" Lyra forced herself to ask. "My mother," Theo said with a small smile, "pointed out that she always knew you were special and had been wondering when the hell I'd figure it out. Apparently, half the women on this property have been placing bets on when we'd finally get together." Despite the tension, Lyra felt a laugh escape. "Really? Really?" He pulled her closer, his hands releasing hers to wrap around her waist. "But I won't lie to you, Lyra. There's going to be resistance. There are already rumors circulating among the staff. And when we publicly announce your new position as a partner, some people are going to assume the worst." "That I slept my way to the top," she said bluntly. "Exactly." His eyes darkened with anger. "And every time someone insinuates that, I'm going to correct them, loudly and clearly. But love," the word made something melt in her chest, "you're going to have to develop thick skin, because some people are going to say cruel things, and I can't protect you from all of them." "I don't need protection," Lyra said with more confidence than she felt. "I need a partner who'll stand beside me while I prove them wrong." The smile that lit up his face was like the sun bursting through storm clouds. "That I can do." He leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers. "My father wants to see us in his office in an hour. He wants to discuss the terms of your partnership officially." Her stomach did a somersault. "An hour? Enough time for you to breathe, process, and remember that you earned this." His thumbs traced circles on her hips through the thin fabric of her dress. "You built this, Lyra. I'm just making my father see what was always there." She nodded, trying to calm the nerves dancing in her stomach. "And after everything's official?" "After," he said, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her heart skip. "I take you to that dinner I promised. And then, if you want, we can start figuring out what building a life together really means." "I want that," she whispered. "God help me. I want it so badly it scares me." "Then let's be scared together." He pressed a soft kiss to her forehead, then to each of her cheeks, and finally, so briefly it was almost torture, to her lips. "But now we're going to show my father exactly why you're indispensable to the future of this vineyard." Lyra spent the next hour preparing, changing into a more formal outfit, a tailored suit in navy blue that made her feel powerful and professional. She pinned her hair into an elegant bun, applied minimal but polished makeup, and looked at herself in the mirror with iron determination. "You deserve this," she told herself. "You worked for this. Don't let anyone, not even yourself, make you forget that." When she met Theo outside William's office, he stopped mid-step, his eyes widening. "God," he breathed, You look like a CEO, a force of nature." "Good," she replied, smoothing the front of her blazer, "because that's exactly what I intend to be." He smiled, that proud and admiring smile that made her feel like she could conquer the world. "Ready?" She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and nodded. "Ready." They walked in together, side by side, and when William Lancaster looked up from his desk and saw them there, Theo and Lyra, united in purpose and determination, something in his expression shifted. Recognition, perhaps, or respect. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the leather chairs in front of his desk. "Let's discuss the future of Lancaster Vineyards." And as Lyra sat down with Theo beside her and his hand finding hers under the table in silent support, she realized that no matter what came next, the gossip, the judgments, the battles, she was ready, because for the first time in her life, she wasn't fighting alone. The meeting with William Lancaster lasted nearly 3 hours. 3 hours of numbers, projections, discussions about equity stakes and responsibilities. Lyra presented her ideas for the expansion with a confidence that surprised even herself. She talked about strategic partnerships with European distributors, about creating exclusive wine tourism experiences, about transforming the Lancaster brand into something that transcended generations. William listened with growing attention, asking sharp questions that tested not just her knowledge, but her vision. And when he finally pushed a contract across the desk, offering her 15% stake in the new international expansion division, Lyra had to blink several times to make sure she wasn't dreaming. "You earned this," William said simply, his voice matter-of-fact. "My son may be passionate, but he's not a fool, and neither am I. You have a gift for this business, Miss Torres. It would be stupid of me not to recognize that." When they left the office, the sun had already begun to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Lyra held a copy of the contract against her chest, her hand still trembling slightly with adrenaline and disbelief. "You were incredible in there," Theo said as soon as they were alone in the hallway. His voice was loaded with admiration and something darker, more intense. "Watching you tear down every objection my father raised was extremely attractive." Lyra laughed, feeling the tension of the last few hours finally beginning to dissolve. "Attractive? Devastatingly." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to that husky tone that did dangerous things to her self-control. "But now that business is done, I believe I owe you a proper dinner." "Now?" She looked down at her wrinkled suit, her hair that had begun to escape from the bun during the meeting. "I look like a mess." "You look perfect." His eyes traveled over her in a way that made heat spread through her entire body. "But if you want to change, I can wait, or—" A slow, dangerous smile curved his lips. "I can help you." Her heart jumped. "Theo Lancaster, are you shamelessly flirting with me?" "Absolutely." He showed no remorse. "Now that you're officially my business partner, I can flirt with you without any conflict of interest. It's liberating, actually." She rolled her eyes, but couldn't suppress the smile. "Give me 30 minutes to get ready, and then you can take me to this mysterious dinner." "Deal." He leaned in, pressing a quick but promising kiss to her lips. "I'll meet you at the main entrance." Lyra practically floated back to her quarters, changing into a simple but elegant dress in emerald green that hugged her curves and ended just above her knees. She let her hair down, allowing the waves to fall over her shoulders, and applied just a touch of makeup, mascara, lip gloss, a light blush. When she came down the stairs 25 minutes later, she found Theo waiting at the entrance, wearing dark pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He held a small bouquet of wild roses. Nothing extravagant, just a simple and sincere arrangement that made her heart melt. "For you," he said, offering the flowers, "because you deserve to be courted properly." She took the bouquet, inhaling the delicate fragrance. "Where are we going?" "It's a surprise." He offered his arm and she accepted it, allowing him to guide her out of the mansion. But instead of heading to the parking lot, Theo led her through the gardens, following a stone path she knew well, the path that led to the old greenhouse at the back of the property. "Theo!" She looked at him with curiosity. "What are you up to?" "Patience," he murmured, but there was a mischievous gleam in his eyes that made her suspicious. When they reached the greenhouse, Lyra stopped abruptly, her breath catching. The greenhouse had been completely transformed. Hundreds of fairy lights were hung from the glass ceiling, creating a canopy of stars. A small table for two was set up in the center, covered with an impeccable white tablecloth, lit candles, and what appeared to be a complete dinner waiting under silver domes. Soft music played from some hidden speaker, something classical and romantic she couldn't identify. How did you? She was speechless. "I had help," Theo admitted, guiding her inside. The air was perfumed with the scent of flowers and something delicious cooking. Maria prepared your favorite meal, Margaret helped with the decorations, and I may have bribed 2 of the gardeners to hang the lights while you were in the meeting. Tears pricked her eyes. You did all this for me? I'd do anything for you. The sincerity in his voice was absolute. Now please sit down and let me spoil you properly. The dinner was perfect. Maria had prepared wild mushroom risotto, Lyra's favorite dish, accompanied by grilled asparagus and an exceptional red wine from the Lancaster cellar itself. They talked about everything and nothing. Childhood memories, dreams for the future, inside jokes only they understood. But beneath the light conversation, there was a current of tension. Electric, inevitable, building with each shared glance, each accidental touch of fingers reaching for the same wine glass. When they finished dessert, petit gâteau with vanilla ice cream, Theo stood up and extended his hand. Dance with me? There was no music playing at that moment, but Lyra placed her hand in his anyway, allowing him to pull her into his arms. He took his phone from his pocket, pressed play, and a soft melody began. Something slow and intimate that seemed to have been chosen specifically for this moment. They swayed gently, their bodies pressed together, her head resting against his chest, where she could hear the steady rhythm of his heart. Their hands were intertwined between them, and his other hand rested on the curve of her back, his fingers tracing lazy patterns that sent shivers down her spine. Thank you, she whispered against his chest. For all of this, for fighting for me, for believing in me. Lyra. He stopped dancing, using his finger to lift her chin until she was looking into his eyes. You don't need to thank me for doing what I should have done years ago, for giving you what you always deserved. And then he was kissing her, and this kiss was different from all the others. It wasn't urgent or desperate. It was slow, deep, complete, as if they had all the time in the world and he wanted to savor every second. Her hands rose, tangling in his hair, and he moaned softly against her lips, the sound vibrating through her. His hands slid from her back to her hips, pulling her closer until there was no space between their bodies. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily, their eyes dark with desire. Lyra, his voice came out hoarse, strangled. If you want to stop, you need to tell me now, because in 1 more minute I won't be able to... Don't stop. The words came out without hesitation. Please, Theo, don't stop. Something broke in his expression, the last thread of control snapping. He kissed her again, deeper this time, his hands exploring the curves of her body through the thin fabric of her dress. She arched against him, her own fingers working on the buttons of his shirt, desperate to feel his skin against hers. Not here, he murmured against her lips, even though his hands were clearly debating with his brain. You deserve better than the floor of a greenhouse. She laughed, the sound coming out breathless and more than a little desperate. I don't care where, I just need you. He groaned, a low, tortured sound. You're going to kill me. But then he was taking her hand and guiding her out of the greenhouse, back through the gardens. But instead of heading toward the main mansion, he led her down a different path, one that led to the smaller guest house hidden among the trees. It was a charming cottage rarely used, with stone walls covered in ivy and a cozy fireplace. I arranged for it to be ready, Theo admitted as he unlocked the door. Just in case. The interior was cozy and intimate, a deep sofa in front of the fireplace where logs were already crackling, creating dancing shadows on the walls. Rose petals were scattered along the path leading to the bedroom, and through the half-open door she could see more lit candles. You planned all of this, she said, turning to face him. There was no accusation in her voice, only wonder. I hoped, he corrected, closing the door behind them, because I hoped that you'd eventually say yes, and when you did, I wanted it to be perfect. Tears burned her eyes again, but these were from happiness. It's perfect. You're perfect. Far from it. He crossed the space between them, his hands framing her face with a tenderness that contrasted with the fire in his eyes. But with you, I want to be. And then he was kissing her again. And this time, there was no rush, no interruptions, nothing but the two of them and the promise of everything to come. His hands found the zipper of her dress, lowering it slowly, reverently, as if unwrapping the most precious gift. The fabric slipped from her shoulders, falling in a green pool at her feet, and she stood there in just her lingerie, vulnerable but not ashamed under the intensity of his gaze. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he whispered, his fingers tracing the line of her collarbone, down the valley between her breasts, making her tremble. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life showing you how beautiful you are." She reached for his shirt, finishing the work she'd started in the greenhouse, pushing the fabric from his shoulders until he too was bare to the waist. Her hands explored the planes of his chest, feeling the muscles contract under her touch, feeling the acceleration of his heart that matched hers. He lifted her into his arms effortlessly, and she wrapped her legs around his waist as he carried her toward the bedroom, his lips never leaving hers. And when he laid her gently on the bed, when he positioned himself over her with reverence and desire in equal measures, when his hands finally explored every inch of skin he'd dreamed of touching, Lyra knew there was no going back. She was completely, irrevocably, eternally his. And he was hers. The candlelight cast golden shadows dancing across the bedroom walls, transforming the space into something timeless, suspended between the real and the dreamlike. Lyra lay on the bed, her hair spread across the white pillows like dark silk, her eyes fixed on Theo as he positioned himself over her. He paused for a moment, just looking at her with an intensity that made her heart stumble. His hands were braced on either side of her head, his arms tense with restraint, as if he were holding himself back from simply devouring every inch of her. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice hoarse but steady. "Because if you change your mind, at any moment, we stop. No matter how far we go." The concern in his voice, the absolute respect in his eyes, made something inside her melt completely. This was the man she loved. Not just the confident and charming Theo the world saw, but this one, the vulnerable and careful man who put her comfort above his own desire. "I'm sure," she whispered, raising a hand to trace the line of his jaw. "I want you, Theo. All of you. Now." He closed his eyes briefly, as if absorbing the words, letting them settle somewhere deep. When he opened them again, there was something almost reverent in his gaze. "Then let me love you," he murmured, "the way I've always wanted to." He started with kisses, slow, deep kisses that made her forget her own name. His mouth explored hers with delicious patience, savoring, learning every angle, every sigh that escaped her lips. Then his lips began a journey, down her jaw, stopping at the sensitive spot just below her ear that made her gasp. He smiled against her skin, clearly pleased to have discovered that secret, and continued exploring the side of her neck, the curve of her shoulder, the line of her collarbone. His hands followed the path of his mouth, tracing reverently over every curve. When they reached the clasp of her bra, he paused, his eyes meeting hers in silent question. She nodded, and he unhooked the clasp with surprisingly skilled fingers, sliding the straps down her arms until nothing stood between them. "Perfect," he breathed, his eyes darkening as he drank her in. "So absolutely perfect." Lyra felt heat rise up her neck, not from shame, but from pure awareness of how completely she was exposed to him, physically and emotionally. But when his hands covered her breasts, when his thumbs brushed her nipples in lazy circles that made her arch, all self-consciousness dissolved into pure sensation. "Theo," she moaned, her own hands exploring the planes of his back, feeling the muscles ripple under her palm. "I've got you," he murmured against her skin, his mouth following the path of his hands. When his lips closed around a sensitive nipple, she gasped, her fingers burying in his hair. He alternated between tenderness and pressure, learning what made her sigh, what made her moan, what made her squeeze her legs around him in growing need. And with each response he murmured words against her skin. Beautiful, perfect were mine, each word burning its way straight to her heart. His hands slid lower, tracing the curve of her waist, the slope of her hips. When his fingers hooked into the waistband of her panties, he paused again, his eyes seeking hers. "Yes," she whispered before he could ask. "Please, Theo, I need you." He slid the fabric down her legs, discarding it somewhere on the dark floor. And then she was completely naked before him, vulnerable and exposed and absolutely free. Theo knelt between her legs, his hands sliding up the inside of her thighs in a caress that was half adoration, half promise. "You're so beautiful," he said, his voice broken. "And all mine." "All yours," she agreed, the truth of the words reverberating through her. He kissed her again, not her mouth this time, but the inside of her knee, then her thigh, moving higher with each kiss until she was trembling, her hands gripping the sheets beneath her. When his mouth finally reached the center of her need, she cried out his name, her body arching off the bed. The sensation was overwhelming. Not just the physical pleasure, but the absolute intimacy of it, the way he worshipped her with every touch, every kiss, as if she were something sacred. "Theo, I can't, it's too much." She could barely form coherent words, lost in waves of sensation that built and built. "Let go," he murmured against her. "I've got you, love. Let go for me." And she did. Her climax hit her like a wave breaking against the shore, pulling her under and leaving her breathless, trembling, completely undone. He held her through it, his hands steadying her hips, his mouth softening into gentle kisses until the tremors subsided. When she managed to open her eyes again, she found him watching her with an expression of pure wonder. "You're incredible," he said, crawling back up her body. "Watching you come apart. God, Lyra, I could do that for hours." She laughed, the sound coming out breathless but genuine. "Are you trying to kill me?" "No, I'm trying to love you the way you deserve." He kissed her deeply, and she could taste herself on his lips, which should have been strange, but somehow was just more intimate. Her hands found his belt, working at the buckle with trembling fingers. "My turn," she murmured against his lips. He helped, pushing his pants and boxers off in one motion, kicking them away until finally, there was nothing between them. Lyra let her hands explore, learning the contours of his body the same way he'd learned hers. Each touch made her want more. Each sound she pulled from him fed her own growing desire. "Lyra," he groaned when her hand closed around him, his body shuddering. "If you keep doing that, this is going to end a lot faster than I want." She smiled, feeling powerful and desired in a way she'd never experienced before. "Then maybe you should have me now." His eyes darkened until they were almost black. "Are you sure? We can wait. We can—" "Theo." She framed his face with her hands, forcing him to look into her eyes. "I love you. I want you. Now. Please." He nodded, reaching for the nightstand where he'd apparently thought of everything. Protection waiting there. He protected himself quickly, then positioned himself over her again, one hand beside her head, the other guiding himself to her. "Tell me if it's too much," he whispered, pressing his forehead to hers. "Tell me if you need me to stop." "Don't stop," she whispered back. "Show me that you're mine." He entered her slowly, gently, giving her time to adjust. The sensation was overwhelming. Fullness, connection, intimacy so deep it brought tears to her eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked through gritted teeth, his body trembling with the effort of staying still. "More than okay," she managed to say, her legs wrapping around his hips, pulling him deeper. "Perfect. You're perfect." He began to move then, slow and steady rhythm that built gradually, each thrust deeper than the last. Their hands were intertwined beside her head, his eyes fixed on hers, and Lyra realized this was what made love different from sex. This connection, this looking into each other's eyes, this feeling of souls meeting as much as bodies. "I love you," Theo murmured, his rhythm increasing. "God, Lyra, I love you so much." "I love you," she responded, feeling another climax building, different from the first, deeper, more complete, as if every cell in her body was waking up. "Theo, I know." He shifted the angle slightly, and suddenly she was seeing stars. "Let go, love, come with me." And she did, her climax tearing through her at the same moment she felt him shatter, her name a hoarse cry on his lips. They clung to each other through it, two bodies moving as one, two souls finally, meeting in the middle. When they finally came down, both were gasping, sweaty, completely devastated in the best possible way. Theo rolled to the side, pulling her with him so she was nestled against his chest, her head over his heart. They stayed like that for long moments, just breathing, just being. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her back, and she could feel his heartbeat gradually slowing beneath her cheek. "That was—" She started but couldn't find adequate words. "Yeah," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. "It was." She propped herself up on an elbow to look at him, and what she saw in his eyes made her fall in love with him all over again. Tenderness, wonder, something close to reverence. "You're my home," she whispered, echoing words he'd said days ago, but that now carried so much more weight. "And you're my fire," he replied, pulling her down for another kiss. Softer this time, but no less meaningful. "You always have been. You always will be." They made love again that night, slower this time, exploring, learning, memorizing. And between moments of passion they talked, about dreams and fears, about the past and the future, about all the lost years and all the years to come. When they finally fell asleep, intertwined so completely it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began, the first light of dawn was just beginning to paint the sky pink. And in the morning, when Lyra woke in Theo's arms, her first sight his face relaxed in sleep, she knew with absolute certainty that this love, this connection, this promise, was worth every risk, every fear, every battle to come. Because some things once found are worth fighting to keep, and Theo Lancaster, he was definitely worth the fight. The weeks following that night were an intoxicating mix of intense work, growing love, and the inevitable resistance Lyra had foreseen. But with Theo by her side, steady, unwavering, fiercely protective, she faced each challenge with her head held high. There were whispers, of course, sidelong glances from older staff members who remembered when she was just a girl running through the hallways, veiled comments at business dinners when investors asked about her qualifications, a particularly cruel article on a wine industry gossip blog that described her as the modern Cinderella who traded brooms for stocks. But for every negative voice, there were 10 supporting her. Her mother, who hugged her tight and whispered, "You're proving we're more than they thought." Eleanor Lancaster, who surprisingly became an ally, shutting down gossip with icy elegance whenever it arose. And William, who after witnessing Lyra negotiate a particularly difficult distribution contract with Japanese investors, simply nodded and said, "You have the instinct. That can't be taught." But it was Theo who kept her anchored. Theo who showed up at her office with coffee when she worked late. Theo who held her hand under the table during difficult meetings. Theo who kissed her every night and whispered promises of futures she was finally beginning to believe in. It was on a Friday afternoon, 3 months after that transformative night, that everything changed again. Lyra was in her new office, a beautiful space on the second floor of the mansion overlooking the vineyards, reviewing proposals for the grand opening of the new events wing that would be the heart of the international expansion. It was a project she'd designed from scratch, and seeing the architectural plans spread across her desk filled her with pride and purpose. A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called without looking up, assuming it was Margaret with more documents. "I was hoping I'd find you here." She looked up to find Theo standing in the doorway, but this wasn't the usual relaxed Theo. He wore an impeccable suit in charcoal grey that molded to his body perfectly. His hair was carefully styled, and there was something in his expression, nervousness mixed with determination, that made her heart race. "What happened?" She stood immediately, concern coloring her voice. "Is something wrong?" "No." He closed the door behind him and crossed the room toward her. "Nothing's wrong. Quite the opposite, actually." He stopped in front of her desk, his hands sliding into his pockets in a way she recognized as his nervous tick. "Lyra, I need to show you something. Can you come with me?" Curiosity won over concern. "Now. I have a conference call in 40 minutes. Please." There was something in his voice, an underlying urgency that wasn't exactly desperation but was close. "Trust me, this can't wait." She studied his face for a moment, seeing the sincerity there, the unspoken importance of whatever this was. "Okay, lead the way." He let out a relieved breath, extending his hand. She took it, and he guided her out of the office, down the stairs, through the gardens. But instead of following any familiar path, he led her toward a part of the vineyard she rarely visited, an older section where the vines were gnarled and ancient, their roots deeply buried in the rich soil. At the heart of this old vineyard was a clearing she knew well. It was where she and Theo used to come as children, where they built forts from branches and made childish promises about conquering the world together. But the clearing wasn't as she remembered. In the center was a simple but beautiful structure, a wooden arch intertwined with white hydrangeas and green foliage, with fairy lights wound through it. A small table was set up with chilled champagne and 2 crystal glasses, and scattered around in concentric circles were hundreds, no thousands of rose petals in shades of white and pale pink. Lyra stopped at the edge of the clearing, her hand flying to cover her mouth. "Theo, what is all this?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he guided her to the center of the clearing, stopping under the arch where the afternoon sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced over them. "Do you remember this place?" he asked softly, his hands holding hers. "Of course I do." Tears were already burning her eyes. "We spent hours here. You used to say that one day you'd build a house here, right in this spot. And you said it would be silly to build a house in the middle of a vineyard," he continued, a smile curving his lips. "But then I said I didn't care if it was silly, because if it was where you'd be, then it was where I wanted to be." The tears started falling now, sliding down her cheeks. "I remember. I was 10 years old when I said that." His thumbs wiped away her tears, even as his own eyes were shining with emotion. "And I didn't fully understand what it meant. But Lyra," he took a deep breath as if bracing himself, "I understand now." And then he was kneeling. The entire world stopped. The air left her lungs in a gasp, her hands flew to cover her mouth, and all she could do was look down at this man, this beautiful, complicated, perfect man, kneeling in the earth of the vineyard they'd grown up in together. "Lyra Torres." His voice was steady, but she could see the emotion shining in his eyes. "You are the most constant thing in my life. The only certainty in a world of unknowns. When I was 10, I knew I wanted to be where you were. When I was 18, I was too much of a coward to admit what that meant. And when I came back here 3 months ago and saw you in that hallway," he paused, clearly fighting emotion, "I knew I'd spent 8 years running from home when home had always been you." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, opening it to reveal the most beautiful ring Lyra had ever seen. It wasn't extravagant or excessive, it was perfect. A deep blue sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, set in delicate white gold, simple, elegant, timeless. "This sapphire," Theo continued, his voice thickening, "belonged to my grandmother. She told me, shortly before she died, that I should give this to the woman who made my heart feel at home. And there's no one, Lyra, no one in the entire world who makes me feel more complete, more myself, more at home than you." He paused, letting the words settle between them. Around them, the world seemed to be waiting. The leaves stopped whispering, the birds fell silent, even the wind held its breath. "So I'm asking you, here in this place where we made our first promises to each other." His eyes met hers, and what she saw there was so pure, so true, that fresh tears fell. "Lyra Torres, will you share your life with me? Will you build a future with me? Will you let me spend every day proving to you that this love is real, that this love lasts, that this love is worth every challenge we'll face?" He took the ring from the box, holding it between them. "Marry me, Lyra. Make me the luckiest man alive. Say yes." For a moment, Lyra couldn't speak. Emotion filled her so completely that words seemed inadequate, too insignificant to capture the magnitude of what she felt. So she did the only thing she could. She knelt beside him there in the dirt, framing his face with her hands, letting him see every emotion written in her eyes. "It's always been you," she whispered, her voice broken but certain. "When I was 8 and you taught me to climb the tree. When I was 15 and I realized my feelings were more than friendship. When you left and my world turned grey, and when you came back and my world exploded into color again. It's always been you, Theo. It always will be you." She pressed her forehead to his, her tears mixing with his. "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. 1,000 times yes." The smile that exploded across his face was pure sunshine, radiant, incandescent, transformative. His hands trembled slightly as he took her left hand, sliding the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made specifically for her. And then he was pulling her into his arms and kissing her with an intensity that made her world spin. It was promise and celebration. It was past and future. It was everything they'd been and everything they would be. When they finally broke apart, both laughing through tears, he held her hand, looking at the ring on her finger, with an expression of pure wonder. "You said yes," he murmured, as if he still didn't quite believe it. "I said yes," she confirmed, admiring how the sapphire caught the sunlight, casting blue reflections across her skin. "Did you really think I'd say anything else?" "I hoped." He pulled her back to her feet, his hands framing her face. "But hope and certainty are different things, and now that I have certainty—" He spun her in a spontaneous circle, pulling a giddy laugh from her. "Now I feel like I could fly." He set her back down but kept his arms around her, swaying her gently even without music. "I have one more thing to show you," he said after a moment. "There's more?" She couldn't imagine how this evening could get more perfect. He guided her a few steps away, pointing to an area near the edge of the clearing where wooden stakes marked out a perimeter. "I've already talked to architects. If you want, and only if you want, I want to build our house here, right in this spot where it all began." Lyra looked at the stakes, then back at him, her heart so full it ached. "You're serious?" "Completely." His eyes held hers with fierce intensity. "I want to build something that's ours, Lyra. Not my parents' mansion, not something inherited from past generations. Something new, something we build together from the ground up. A house that's a promise that this love, we, are something entirely our own." She couldn't hold back the tears this time. They fell freely as she threw herself into his arms, holding him so tight it was almost painful. Yes, yes to everything, to the house, to the life, to every crazy adventure you want to embark on. Yes. They stayed like that for long moments, just holding each other as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Around them, the vineyard stretched in orderly rows, silent witnesses to a promise made, to a future beginning. "We should tell your family," Lyra finally said, though she didn't want to move from that perfect clearing. "They already know." Theo smiled against her hair. "My mother has been impossible for the last 2 weeks, insisting I get on with it before she told you herself. And my father," he laughed, "my father gave me a bottle of the rarest wine from our cellar and said, 'Don't mess this up, son.' I think that's approval in Lancaster language." "And my mother?" Lyra asked, knowing Rosa would have to be aware too. "I talked to her yesterday, asked for her blessing formally." His eyes met hers, serious now. "She cried. And then she hugged me and said if I made you happy, I'd be welcome in her family. But if I hurt you—" "She has access to all the kitchen knives," Lyra finished, laughing through her own tears. "Exactly." He kissed her forehead, then each of her cheeks, then finally, softly, her lips. "So what do you say? Ready to face the hordes and announce that Lyra Torres is becoming Lyra Lancaster?" The name sounded strange but wonderful at the same time. "Lyra Torres Lancaster," she corrected. "I'm not abandoning who I am. I'm adding who you are." The smile that lit up his face was everything she needed to see. "Perfect. You're absolutely perfect." And as they walked hand in hand back to the mansion, the sapphire ring catching the last rays of sun, Lyra knew with absolute certainty that this was just the beginning. The best was yet to come. 6 months passed like a feverish dream, months filled with wedding planning, finalizing the new events wing, and the constant construction of the house in the clearing that now symbolized not just a place, but a promise fulfilled. Lyra had proved every skeptic wrong. The opening of the International Events Wing was a resounding success, attracting distributors from 15 countries and securing contracts that would triple Lancaster Vineyard's presence in the global market. Business magazines that had previously ignored her now requested interviews. The same blog that had called her Cinderella published a formal retraction, calling her the visionary mind behind the Lancaster Revolution. But none of that mattered as much as this day. The wedding day dawned with a cloudless sky, painted in shades of impossible blue, that seemed to have been ordered especially for the occasion. The ceremony would take place at sunset. Lyra had insisted on it, wanting to get married during golden hour when the light transformed the vineyards into something magical. In the room that had been her refuge throughout her life, Lyra stood before the mirror while her mother adjusted the veil for the third time, tears shining in both their eyes. The dress was a masterpiece, created by a local designer Lyra had discovered and supported. It was simple but stunning, in ivory silk that flowed like water over her curves. The neckline was modest but elegant, the shoulders were bare, and the skirt fell in ethereal layers to the floor, ending in a small train that would catch the sunlight as she walked. There were no excessive rhinestones or ruffles, just clean lines and luxurious fabric that made her feel like the best version of herself. "Mija," Rosa whispered, her hands trembling as she adjusted the delicate lace veil that had belonged to Lyra's grandmother. "You're so beautiful, so absolutely radiant." Lyra held her mother's hands, squeezing them firmly. "Thank you, Mom, for everything. For raising me alone, for teaching me to be strong, for never letting me forget my worth. You always had worth, mi amor." Rosa framed her daughter's face, her thumbs wiping away the tears that had started to fall. "I just made sure you never forgot it. And now—" She let out a wet laugh. "Now you're going to marry a man who sees that worth as clearly as I always have." A soft knock on the door interrupted them. Eleanor Lancaster entered, elegant in a mother-of-the-bride dress in navy blue, her smile warm and genuine. "Lyra, dear," she said, stopping to admire her. "You're absolutely stunning. Theo is going to fall apart when he sees you." Lyra laughed through tears. "That's the plan." Eleanor approached, holding a small velvet box. "I know you already have something borrowed, your grandmother's veil, and something blue." She gestured to the small blue ribbon Lyra had sewn into the inside of her dress, a tradition. "But I'd like to offer something old if you'll accept it." She opened the box to reveal a pair of delicate pearl earrings, clearly antique but impeccably preserved. These belonged to William's mother, the same woman who gave Theo the sapphire ring. "She wore them at her own wedding and I wore them at mine. It would be an honor if you wore them at yours." Lyra felt fresh tears burn. Eleanor's acceptance, not just tolerance, but genuine acceptance and welcome into the family, meant more than words could express. "It would be an honor," Lyra whispered, allowing Eleanor to place the earrings in her ears. When she was finally complete, dress, veil, earrings, bouquet of white roses and hydrangeas, Lyra barely recognized the woman in the mirror. But at the same time, she was exactly who she'd always been, just Timur, more confident, more happy, more whole. "It's time," Margaret announced softly from the door. "The guests are all seated, and Theo is, well, he's trying not to look like he's going to throw up from nerves, but he's failing miserably." Lyra laughed, the sound relieving the tension in her own nerves. "Then I guess I better not make him wait any longer." The walk from the room to the clearing, now transformed into an outdoor cathedral, was a short but significant journey. Each step brought her closer to a future she'd almost given up believing was possible. When they reached the edge of the clearing, Lyra stopped, her breath catching. The transformation was breathtaking. Rows of white chairs formed a central aisle decorated with rose petals. The arch where Theo had proposed was expanded and intertwined with thousands of white flowers, roses, hydrangeas, jasmine, creating a dream structure. And all around, fairy lights were hung in the trees, waiting to light up when the sun set. But none of it mattered as much as the man standing under the arch. Theo wore an impeccable tuxedo, but it was the expression on his face that stopped her. Pure wonder, admiration, love so intense she could feel it across the distance separating them. The music began, a cello version of At Last that Lyra had chosen specifically. She held her mother's arm, taking a step forward, then another, each one bringing her closer to her future. The guests turned to watch, friends, family, colleagues, everyone who had witnessed their journey. But Lyra had eyes only for Theo, who was visibly fighting to maintain composure, tears already shining in his eyes. When she finally reached him, Rosa kissed her cheek, then placed Lyra's hand in Theo's. "Take care of my heart," she whispered to him. "With my life," Theo responded, his voice hoarse with emotion. Rosa nodded, then stepped away, leaving them standing together under the arch as the officiant, an old family friend, began the ceremony. "We are gathered here," he began, but Lyra barely heard the words. All she could focus on was Theo, the way he held her hands as if she were the most precious thing in the world, the way his eyes never left hers, the way his thumb traced soft circles on her palm in an unconscious gesture of comfort. "Theo and Lyra have written their own vows," the officiant announced, and Lyra felt her heart race. Theo went first. He cleared his throat, clearly trying to control his emotions, but when he spoke, his voice was steady. "Lyra, when we were children, I promised I'd always protect you, that I'd never let you drown." He paused, a small smile curving his lips even through the tears. "I broke that promise when I left. I let you drown in uncertainty and doubt, and that's something I'll spend the rest of my life making up for." He squeezed her hands tighter. "But today, I make new promises. I promise to see you, really see you, every day. I promise to fight for us, even when it's hard. I promise never to let you forget your worth. I promise to build a life with you that honors both where we came from and where we're going. And I promise to love you, fiercely, completely, eternally, every day, for the rest of my life." Tears were falling freely down Lyra's face now, but she didn't care. When it was her turn, her voice came out surprisingly steady. "Theo, you taught me to climb trees when I was afraid of heights. You taught me that belonging isn't about where you come from, but about who chooses to stay. And when you came back, when you finally came home, you taught me that some loves are worth the wait." She blinked through tears, meeting his eyes. "I promise to be your partner in every way, in business, in life, in every adventure. I promise to challenge you when you're wrong and support you when you're right. I promise to build a home with you that's both refuge and adventure. And I promise to love you, with every broken part and every whole part of me, for every day I'm given." "The rings," the officiant said softly. Theo's college best friend, serving as best man, handed over the wedding bands, simple gold bands they'd chosen together. Theo slid hers on first, his hands trembling slightly. "With this ring," he said, his voice thickening, "I marry you. Today, tomorrow, always." Lyra took his ring, sliding it onto his finger. "With this ring, I marry you. Today, tomorrow, always. By the power vested in me," the officiant said with a smile, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Theo, you may kiss your bride." Theo didn't wait for more. He pulled Lyra into his arms and kissed her, not the polite, chaste kiss of a public ceremony, but a deep, passionate, promising kiss that drew applause and whistles from the guests. When they finally broke apart, both laughing through tears, the sun was beginning to set, painting everything in shades of gold. The fairy lights flickered to life, transforming the clearing into something magical. The reception was perfect, intimate but joyful, elegant but relaxed. They dined under the stars, danced on the soft grass, laughed and cried, and celebrated a love that had survived time, distance, and doubt. But it was late in the evening, when most of the guests had left and only close family remained, that Theo pulled Lyra away from the festivities. "Come with me," he whispered, intertwining his fingers with hers. He guided her through the vineyards, following a lantern-lit path, until they reached the construction site, their future home, now partially built. The foundations were ready, the frame was going up, and you could begin to see the shape it would take. "I wanted to show you something," Theo said, carefully guiding her through the construction site to what would be the living room. He pointed up where a skylight was being installed. "See that window?" "Yes," Lyra whispered, imagining how sunlight would pour through it. "I designed it so that every morning the first ray of sun will fall exactly where our bed will be." He pulled her into his arms, his voice low and intimate. "Because I want to wake up every day with you bathed in sunlight. I want to start each day seeing you exactly as you are, luminous, beautiful, mine." Lyra buried her face in his neck, unable to speak through the emotion filling her completely. "And there," he turned her to point to another area, "there'll be a large window overlooking the vineyards where you grew up, because I never want you to forget where you came from. And right there," he pointed to the center of what would be the house, "there'll be a fireplace where we'll tell our children stories about how Mommy and Daddy fell in love." "Children," Lyra repeated, testing the word. They'd talked about it, of course, but hearing it said so casually, so certainly, made something melt in her chest. "If you want," Theo hurried to add, "there's no rush. We have all the time in the world." She turned in his arms, framing his face with her hands. "I want everything with you. The house, the children, the lazy mornings and the passionate nights, the silly fights and the even better makeups. I want to build a life as beautiful as this place." "Then let's do it," he murmured against her lips. "Let's build something extraordinary." They stood there for a long time, embraced in the skeleton of their future home, while the stars wheeled above them and the vineyards whispered promises to the wind. And when they finally returned to the celebration, hand in hand, their wedding bands catching the moonlight, everyone who saw them knew without doubt that this love, this unlikely, impossible, inevitable love, would last forever. Because some loves aren't just found, they're built brick by brick, promise by promise, kiss by kiss. And Theo and Lyra, they were just beginning to build. In the last scene of the night, they stood on the Lancaster mansion porch, watching the sun rise over the vines. Exactly as they'd done countless times as children, but this time different. This time, Lyra was leaning against Theo's chest, her wedding dress still flowing around her legs, their wedding bands gleaming in the growing light. "Is this real?" she whispered, the question echoing one she'd asked months ago. Theo kissed the top of her head, his hands resting protectively on her waist. "Forever real," he promised. "We'll build a life with each sunrise, a love that no one else can understand, but that we'll always feel." And as the sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, marking the beginning of their first day as husband and wife, both knew with absolute certainty that this was just the beginning. The best was yet to come. In the end, Lyra discovered that true love wasn't about abandoning who you are. It was about finding someone who saw you completely and chose to stay. She didn't need to become a Lancaster to deserve her place. She brought her Torres strength and transformed everything around her. Theo didn't save her from a lesser life. He simply had the courage to recognize what she'd always been: extraordinary. They built their house on the same roots where they played as children, proving that sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't leaving in search of something new, but recognizing the treasure that was always by your side. And when the vineyards bloomed that spring, the old vines intertwined with the new, everyone saw what Lyra and Theo had always known: that the best loves aren't the ones that come without effort, but the ones you choose to fight for every day with each sunrise.